In this recording, we're going to be going through reading and defining the reading construct as it is interpreted by Aptis, and then looking specifically at reading items which target lower levels, so A1 and A2 according to the CEFR, and what it is about them that is suitable for lower levels. Overall then, these are the objectives of this presentation. So we're going to talk about the reading construct. This is something that we mentioned in the first week. So if we want to measure something, language ability, we have to have a clear definition, a working definition of what it is we are measuring, of what it is we are targeting. So in the case of reading, we have to have a clear understanding of how we understand the process involved. And then having done that, think about various sub-skills which may target various different aspects of that reading construct. And then of those sub-skills, think which ones are appropriate at lower levels, which ones can reliably inform us about reading ability in lower level candidates, so A2 and below. And then, having thought about which sub-skills are appropriate, think about which tasks can be appropriate for effectively targeting those sub-skills reliably. And then finally, we will look at some examples of reading specifications and think about some of the information that needs to be included specifically for reading tasks. So, if we think about the reading construct then divided into sub-skills, typically we see a list such as this, skimming and scanning being obvious examples. So to go back to that example of a timetable versus reading something to get a general idea, overall idea, you would scan a timetable to see where your information is. Whereas if you are trying to get an overall understanding of a text, and probably you would skim through it to see what the main ideas are. Reading for detail versus reading for inference. Understanding the main idea and the gist, distinguishing fact versus opinions. These are all associated with good reading skills. Understanding words in context. We need to be careful that we are targeting reading skills and not vocabulary skills. It can be a little bit difficult, and there is a lot of interesting research on whether vocabulary can be truly separated from reading ability, and the extent to which vocabulary is a good predictor of reading performance. But we do see tasks which target meaning in context. So, this is a reading model, a reading construct, so to speak, upon which Aptis is largely based. This is by Khalifa and Weir, 2009, and you can see that at the lower levels, at A, elementary levels, students are required, test takers are required to read very much at word level and sentence level. As they go up, they're required to read more at paragraph level, until finally at the highest C levels, they're required to get an understanding of an entire text. So what this means for the purpose of item development is that if we are developing lower level items, then the information to answer the questions correctly needs to be contained at word or sentence level. So we can't have items which target understanding across the text. At C level we do. So if we have a C level reading text that can be answered only by reading at sentence level, then that's also not going to be appropriate, and we'll get more into that when we come to higher level reading text. And to do that, here are some common task types. Not all of these are used in Apttus, but they are used in reading tasks. So it can be word and sentence matching. True, false, not given are fairly common as items. Not given is usually there, so there are 3 options. Dichotomous items, so true, false, yes, no, items which have a 50-50 chance of getting them right or wrong, are usually too high in guessability, so we can't be entirely sure how much of a score was due to chance. And some would say even 3 options are too few, but a 33% chance is certainly better than a 50% chance. Comprehension questions are very good. These have the advantage that they can be relatively easily tailored to target all levels of reading ability. So they can be written to target reading at sentence level, and they can just as well be written to target reading across texts. So they are quite adaptable in that sense. And also we see items like closed text and gap fills. There are a couple of approaches we can take here. There may be a list of options from which candidates choose the one they think best fills the gap, or it can be a form of short answer format where they are required to write X number of words, usually 1 to 3 or 1 to 5 depending on the level, and complete the gap. These are problematic in some ways where candidates are required to supply their own answers. The first issue could be to do with the variability in responses that could happen. So we need to be sure that the answer key contains all possible variations of the correct answer, and also we need to consider the extent to which we would penalise spelling or grammar errors, and if we do that, then we're getting into quite murky waters because we're possibly touching on the writing construct. Apttus is designed as a discrete skill test where skills are tested in isolation as far as possible, and putting writing skills into the equation could get us into potentially murky waters in that regard. So this is an example of an A1 item. It's an email. It's from Jerry to a friend, and it's a gap fill. So the options are provided. There are 3 options, and the candidate chooses the one they think fits the gap. And you can see that this item at A1 level is completely at sentence level. So what this means is that you only need the sentence in order to answer the question. If any information is contained in other sentences, then that would not be up to spec in an A1 task. So have a look at it. You can see that essentially it's a list of sentences. They could be isolated, essentially. They're presented together as though they are an email, but they are, in fact, independent sentences that just look as if they are put into a coherent text. Notice as well there's no real cohesive devices either between the sentences, and that's completely on purpose. We do want to make sure it's a reading task, even at this lower level. So we want to make sure that the items are not grammar items, they're not vocabulary items, so we're not bringing grammar knowledge in to answer anything correctly. And there is an element of reading across sentences. So if we look at the third one, for example, I blank to work every day in my new car. So if the sentence was simply I blank to work, then there could be a variety of possible answers there, such as drive, cycle, walk, whatever. But in my new car at the end, we are getting them to read the entire sentence in order to get that option. These are the specifications for that A1 task we just looked at then, and here's the information that an item writer would need to produce that A1 reading text. So we have the description. This is where it tells you it is a 3-option multiple choice gap fill, that there are 6 sentences. Each of those sentences will have 1 gap, and that the test taker is required to select from a drop-down menu the best option to fill the gap and eliminate 2 distractors. And it will tell you that the first sentence is an example with a gap completed. So this means there are 5 questions essentially, because the first one is an example and the text is 6 sentences in total. The instructions are also included in the specifications. This is important to make sure that the input we're giving to the candidate is standardized between item writers and between the different versions. So it could be read the, and then whatever's in brackets you fill in yourself as appropriate. So read the email from your friend, for example. The features of the text. So at A1 level we need to know how long the text is. Again, it mentions 6 sentences, and also it defines how long each individual sentence should be. So we don't have one very long sentence and then a few much shorter ones. It defines the lexical level. We're not allowed to use vocabulary that's not on the K1 list, and we're not allowed to use grammatical exponents that are higher than A1. Okay. And then as well as that, it also gives you the features of the task. So this, in the case of this item, that would be the 3 options. So it's 1 word, and they all have to be nouns or verbs or adjectives. So you couldn't have 1 noun, 1 verb, 1 adjective, because that may make it more of a grammar task than a reading task. So whatever you choose, you have to use the same word class in your options. You can change it, so you could have in one sentence a noun, in another sentence a verb, in another sentence an adjective, but each individual set of options has to be the same. And again, the lexical level is K1. We can only use words that are on the K1 list. Now here, on the other hand, we have an A2 task. And the task is to rearrange the sentences into a cohesive order. So this is different. Here we need very strong connectors. So each sentence needs to very strongly reference the preceding sentence. So, for example, John Smith was born in 1930 in a small town in Scotland. The next one, E, his parents died when he was still very young. So then the option after that would probably be A, after this sad event. So that's a very strong link there, so linking back to the death of his parents in this case. So there's very strong, very explicit linking from sentence to sentence. So here we are reading beyond the sentence, so to speak. In order to get the correct answer, the test taker has to read information in the next sentence and order it accordingly. And finally, to finish off this week's presentation, these are the A2 specifications for that jumbled sentence reading task. So the information an item writer would need in order to produce that task. So again, there's, as always, a description of the task. We need to reorder jumbled sentences to form a short, cohesive text. There are 7 sentences. The introductory one will be given first, and it will tell you that it's first. And then from the remaining sentences, they need to be reordered in order to form a linear narrative. There's no extra sentence. We need extra sentences. We need to use all of the options. And our focus here is very much into sentence cohesion. Again, we define the instructions. These need to be more or less verbatim, and the only variations would be according to any variations in the task. So if the sentences below are from a whatever, so that would vary depending on how you have structured it, but everything else is verbatim in order to ensure consistency. And this time the text is essentially the task, so we only need to define the text. There's no need to define the options because the options are the text. So it gives you the length, how many sentences, and again that idea of one introductory sentence and 6 jumbled ones, and then defining the K2 level and the grammatical level. So here we can use K1 and K2 words, and we can go up to A2 grammar exponents. That brings us to the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.